Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Update Extra video and the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. And normally these videos are kind of half an hour, 40 minutes long. This is going to be a really short one, only a couple of subjects to talk about because, you know, Christmas and family and stuff. So I want to remind you of this video. Yes, I've played this a number of times before. It is so bloody prescient, right? I let her say her things and then I'll read out subtitles next. But this is from Chechnya in 1994. I'm going to play you this before talking a little bit about Mariinka and other such areas. 5 years later, Putin launched the Second Chechen War by staging a false flag attack against Russian civilians. Russian imperialism never went away. It just took a short break because the Russian Federation was too weak to invade its neighbours. This is what she says back all those decades ago, and how prescient was this?
Октябрьский район у нас. Не знаю, что нам делать. В больницах, везде уничтожают нас. Ну, Россия, это надоело нам. Сколько можно терпеть? Сколько можно? Третье, не кончается эта война. Что нам делать, а? Что нам...
Почему вы решили сегодня уехать?
Бомбят там, ни покоя нету. Мины это есть, как называется? Не знаю, короче.
А у вас остались там люди там, ваши родственники?
Октябрьский район у нас. Не знаю, что нам делать. В больнице...
Right, so I'll read what she says. And this just infuriates the hell out of me because this is history repeating itself. So she says, we don't know what to do. We are from the October district. They are killing us at the hospitals, she says, everywhere. I mean, how much have we seen that? We are sick and tired of Russia. How long can we tolerate it? This war doesn't end. What should we do? They're just bombing and bombing. There is no rest. And of course, this was in the time of, you know, no air defences, so Russia could just go and bomb rather than doing what they've been forced to do in this iteration of Russian imperialism. But back in 1994 in Chechnya, we have someone that could be a Ukrainian from 2022, 2023, and no doubt 2024. This is what the Russians do. And if it wasn't for the Chechen warlords switching sides and Ramzan Kadyrov, I guess, turning his back on his own people, then things might have turned out somewhat differently in this second Chechen war. But my goodness, her words are prescient there. And it just is really depressing to see that things have not changed. And so then we come on to Mariinka. You know, they just bomb and bomb, and or you could say they just shell and shell and shell. A Russian military correspondent, scare quotes, shows off the Russian flag in the ruins of Mariinka. Here it is, he says. Our Mariinka. No homes, no cars, no people. And as Anton Geraschenko says, this is what Russia is proud of. I've added the video of Mariinka in 2020. It was a frontline town then, but there was life there. And my goodness, check out the difference in those two videos. It's so depressing. This is what Russian liberation looks like. It is not liberation, it is destruction. Anyway, he says, here it is, Mariinka. Thus, it can be considered a daring raid, he says. Here, look at that destruction. There's no one. You see, no cars, no people. There it is, the victory banner. The banner of the 150th Brest Division. Looks like a hammer and sickle to me. There it is, our Mariinka. And this is what it looked like back in 2020. Yeah. It looks like a normal place with people going about their business freely. That there, incidentally, that looks like liberty to me. As a person's talking about peace and quiet. It's quiet. If it's quiet, it's quiet. We even got used to sleep during the explosion. So this is as it was still a frontline town, but it was not the frontline town as you would know it now. That, if anything, adds to my anger that is just consistently simmering whenever I think about Russia these days. Just it's enough to make a grown man cry. You know, we hear the birds singing, she says. We hear the cicadas singing in the evening. Even in the evening, people sit on the bench and youths walk and talk to each other. And it makes me very happy. Well, goodness me. There it is now. Just so upsetting that Russia seemed to still try and argue the moral high ground here. When I argue with trolls online, I think, you really believe what you're saying? Do you really believe what you're saying? And then, here, occupiers in Mariupol are planning to demolish 16 houses and a shopping centre to eliminate traces of their crimes, says the city council. Russia's war has caused a humanitarian catastrophe in Mariupol, with almost 90% of the city destroyed in bombardments. Again, you know, is this liberation? And if you go and watch 20 Days in Mariupol, and that's just the first 20 days, and see what the Russians did then. Gee whiz. Russian authorities in occupied Mariupol are planning on demolishing 16 private houses and a shopping centre. Russia's aggression has caused a humanitarian catastrophe with almost 90% of the city destroyed in drone and missile attacks. Residential houses, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, businesses have been damaged or destroyed, and a large number of civilians have been killed. To conceal its war crimes, Russia has demolished 465 buildings in a city with nearly 33,500 apartments in them. Currently, the occupiers have turned Mariupol and surrounding areas into a military base, according to the advisor of the mayor of Mariupol, Petro Andriuschenko. Residents of the city have been used by Russian soldiers as a human shield while having no access to heating after heavy bombardments ruined critical infrastructure. And we heard about this recently, in that a year on from plus probably of Mariupol falling. Yeah, it would be more than a year of Mariupol falling, and many people still don't have the critical infrastructure just to heat their homes. You know, electricity, heating, water, that kind of thing. It's an absolute shocker. Residents of the city have been used by those Russian soldiers as human shields. Consequently, the people are freezing in their apartments, which are gradually deteriorating. I mean, they have built some new ones, and if you remember, Putin, or the fake Putin, went to visit Mariupol and visited, I think, one of them. We've also seen video footage inside them, and they're all kind of falling to bits, really shoddy workmanship going on, and yeah, not a good bit of construction, but it's trying to, I guess, you know, paint a turd, really, isn't it? You can't just spend minimal amounts to pretend that Mariupol hasn't happened by erecting a shoddily built but newly painted apartment block that has stuff going wrong with it already. In addition, Russians have dismantled a torture facility where Ukrainians have been subjected to torment for opposing the occupation. Quote, Russians are demolishing the main torture facility in Mariupol on Metalohiv Avenue. It's the same story as with the drama theatre, simply erasing the traces, Andriuschenko wrote on Telegram. He explained that this is a part of the Central Police Department building where the main filtration point for Ukrainians and the primary torture facility were located. The occupiers have also failed to address a garbage disposal crisis in Mariupol, as the equipment needed to clean the city was looted earlier. In addition, invaders installed a Christmas tree near the ruins of the drama theatre destroyed by Russian attacks. On March the 16th, 2022, Russian occupiers deliberately dropped 2 bombs on a building of the theatre despite the children inscription written on its roof, killing nearly 600 civilians. I mean, that was an absolute, well, it's a war crime of the highest order in my books, in anyone's books, I think. Despite the extensive propaganda efforts from Russia, the Mariupol partisan movement aiming for liberation continues to thrive. On the 16th of December, members of the Mariupol resistance, claiming responsibility for a car bomb attack targeting a Russian military officer from Caucasus units. The Russian officer is currently hospitalized, according to the partisans. And finally, meanwhile, 20 Days in Mariupol, a documentary film by photojournalist and filmmaker Mstislav Chernov, has been shortlisted for the Oscars awards in the documentary feature film and international feature film categories, according to the US Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. The reporters who remained in the city captured what later became defining images of the war: dying children, mass graves, the bombing of a maternity hospital, and more. the world first saw the movie at the Sundance Film Festival and the World Cinema Documentary Competition section, where it received the Audience Award. And as I said to you the other day, I advise you very strongly to go and watch 20 Days in Mariupol. But yeah, just another example of Russian liberation, whether it be Mariinka, Novoselivska, Avdiivka, Novomykhailivka, Mariupol. What the Russians do to these places is unacceptable, obviously. Right, the Wall Street Journal, and this is kind of where I'm going to leave it. Wall Street Journal has written a piece, very short opinion piece actually, on Ukraine's Crimea offensive, and basically talking to the idea that they just need long distance weapons and jobs are good and type thing. With what happened in Feodosia, the Black Sea Fleet has been severely hamstrung. Tuesday's strike, it says, is especially notable because the ship was hit in the Crimean port of Feodosia. That's in the eastern part of the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula, where Russia moved some of its naval assets this year after Ukrainian attacks on the southwestern port of Sevastopol. The strike puts additional pressure on Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which was supposed to dominate Ukraine but has suffered significant losses. The Kremlin has already withdrawn some of its navy from Crimea to the Russian city of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. Ukraine has destroyed or heavily damaged 23 Russian ships and boats and 1 Russian submarine. Alexei Goncharenko, a Ukrainian lawmaker representing the Odessa region, told us on Tuesday. The campaign against the Russian navy has helped Ukraine break Vladimir Putin's attempted blockade of the Black Sea. In defiance of the Kremlin, at least 305 ships have sailed from Ukrainian ports carrying more than 10 million tons of grain and other exports. US Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink said last week that, and this has been invaluable to Ukraine's economy and world food prices. The attack shows that Ukraine can continue to put targets in Crimea at risk with the proper long-range weapons. Ukrainian officials still want to regain all of Crimea, but meantime, they're working to degrade Russian military capabilities on the peninsula. And this is where, this is me talking now, the importance of getting them those missiles and for them to design and manufacture their own indigenous missiles and drones to be able to consistently hit Russian targets behind the contact line. Now, they need to scale that production up to rates that outdo the Russian and Ukrainian, cooperative attempt to build Shaheeds and get Shaheeds raining their hellish explosives down on the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians just need to have better and more if they can. If they can scale up that production with the help of allied defense manufacturers, then there might be some hope for the Ukrainians in terms of having one up on the Shaheeds. The attack, as mentioned, the attack shows that Ukraine can continue to put targets in Crimea at risk with the proper long-range weapons. Ukrainian officials still want to regain all of Crimea, but in the meantime, they are working to degrade the Russian military capabilities on the peninsula. So, Mr. Putin's 2014 annexation of Crimea enabled his 2022 full-scale invasion. Crimea is also a key supply, command, and communications hub for the Russian soldiers who now occupy the southern Ukrainian regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. As I've said before, Crimea is the main reason Russia is involved in this war. They want to keep Crimea, but they want a land bridge, ideally, that stretches for them to Transnistria, so that it cuts off the Ukrainians' ability to export their grain and make money, and it gives Russia the ability to indeed do that, whilst also stealing quite a bit of arable land. And if they can get that land bridge, then they would have the Dnipro River under their control, and it means they can provide Crimea with water, fresh water again. But on the other hand, if the Ukrainians can get hold of enough munitions, such that, as you've seen in the last few days, such that they can do damage to targets, at the very edge of Crimea and possibly into Novorossiysk area, then the Russians can be blockaded successfully, effectively by the Ukrainians. If they blow the Kerch Bridge and blow the Chonhar Bridge again, or bridges, the road and railway bridges there, the Helichesk Bridge, and then hit Armyansk and that road route into Kherson Oblast, then Crimea can be cut off. And if they can consistently manufacture drones and missiles to continually hammer the Russians, then what's the point of the Russians holding on to Crimea? What's the point of them getting themselves involved in an endless war? Now, for the Ukrainians, that's existential, but as I said before, for the Russians, it's not existential. They didn't need to invade Crimea. They just wanted, Ukraine. They just thought it would be an easy exchange of governments, and it would just increase their kind of imperial power in the area. But they didn't need it, whereas Ukrainians need, for their own very existence, to defend Ukraine. And so they can continue doing that. And the longer it goes on, so some people talk about the longer it goes on, the more it suits Russia, and it does, kind of internationally speaking. But it doesn't suit Russia. Really, Russia don't want an endless war because, they tried that in Afghanistan and it didn't work there. It will end up biting them on the arse, and they will have too much pressure on them from mothers and family members, and being on a war footing, and an economy spiraling, and hydrocarbon having oil price caps and sanctions, and they don't want that to continue ad infinitum. So I don't know. Anyway, to continue, we have it saying, if Ukraine can keep the pressure on Crimea, it complicates Mr. Putin's plans for a new offensive. It also puts Ukraine in a stronger position for negotiations if that's how events proceed. All the more reason for the White House and Congress to agree on new weapons to support Kyiv, and for President Biden to stop withholding the longest range missiles. I absolutely agree with this. So on the one hand, I think the Republicans need to just allow Ukraine aid to get through. End of. But I also think that Biden needs to give as many missile capabilities and weapon capabilities as he possibly can to give the Ukrainians that competitive advantage over the Russians. Red lines have been reached, they've been crossed, nothing has happened. They aren't red lines. They were just lines. We shouldn't be afraid of escalation. Look, the Ukrainians have just destroyed yet another ship in a port on Crimea, and nothing has happened. Elon Musk warned that would be the start of World War III. Well, how many ships and submarines have they destroyed on Crimea? And we've not had World War III. So we need to give the Ukrainians as much as we can, and we need to give them the very best weapons we can. We need to give them F-16s that are fully loaded with the best radars and weapons possible, and we need to give them ATACMS, and we need to give them Taurus and Storm Shadows and Scalps, and we need to give them Tomahawks, and we need to give them, so on and so forth. This just needs to be finished. And if it's not finished, that is the US handing over the hegemonic crown to Russia and China, arguably. There's a lot on the line here, and it can be finished really relatively easily in my books. It just needs the united will of allies, and it needs really the US in particular, because they have the stock. Someone's saying this in my threads. I mean, the only difference between the US and many other countries is yes, US has kind of more money than other countries, but you can argue about debt and whatever. But the real difference is just the stocks of weapons that the US has. That's it. And that's why we keep coming back to the US, because when we're talking about, say, the UK and France and Germany aiding, it's like, yeah, we can help. Okay, we've got nothing left. We've got some money, but if we ramp up production, it's going to take like a year before we can. And unfortunately, that wasn't done soon enough, and so we're still talking about ramping up production. But to get 1,000 scalps or Storm Shadows across the Ukraine, then that production needs to be ordered, right? And it needs to be ramped up as well. They need that capital in place to build that stuff. Whereas the Americans just have massive stockpiles of everything. And so it's a very different conversation concerning the US as it is with basically any other nation, bar maybe South Korea and some of these other nations that are in a much more bellicose position. Anyway, that's enough of me whittering on. We can end this thing quickly. I'm pretty sure we can. We're just not doing it for all the many reasons we talked about for 2 years. Take care, everybody. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Toodle pips.